Well, in spite of losing the House last November, Donald Trump has got the wall front and center again, and it brings up an interesting question. I thought we would share that with you and get your take on it, as well as those of my friends Steve Green and Scott Ott. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle, and this right angle has to deal with President Trump and the wall, and the issue is very specific in this case, and the issue is, does President Trump have authority as commander-in-chief to build the wall as a defense of the nation issue rather than a political project? Can he legitimately claim that this is a national security issue and that the country is in danger, and use his commander-in-chief powers in order to do this? So, Scotty, you're a huge student of the Constitution. I am too. Steve is too. We all love it, and we all have shown in the past that we're more than willing to criticize our own team when they overreach the bounds of the Constitution, because the thing we love about the Constitution is its understanding that every human being is imperfect, and there are no angels governing us, because if they did, we wouldn't need the Constitution. So what do you think about that? Do you think that that is a reach? I read a book called The Revenge of Geography, and it's about the relationship of geography to the world, and how it existed in the past and how it exists in the present and will exist in the future. There's no getting around it. And when the author finally got to North America, he said that the number one priority of the United States should be the border with Mexico, that is by far our largest national security issue. So do you think Donald Trump has commander-in-chief authority to do something like this?
It's an interesting question, because it blurs some lines. There's like a Venn diagram here, and you've kind of got the military circle, you've got the the Constitution and the role of Congress and the executive, and then you've got the border itself and just immigration in general, and finding where those overlap without violating any constitutionally sanctified rights, so to speak, is a tricky business, I think. Clearly, the Congress is tasked with developing a uniform rule of naturalization for immigrants to this country. The president is tasked with, commander-in-chief of the military, and also that he's responsible for carrying out the laws that are passed by Congress and signed by him. It gets a little tricky, though. It's kind of like, do you say there's a group of people coming toward our border? Many of them are coming for the best of all possible reasons. They may not be coming in the best of all possible ways. There are some of them who are probably dangerous because they either involuntarily are dangerous by carrying disease with them, or they could be consciously dangerous. They're gang members, they're the drug lords or drug mules, and they're people coming in to actually do harm to this country. It's one thing to say, hey, we can build a bulwark to prevent an invading army from coming ashore or coming into our country. It's another thing to say, hey, here's a big group of refugees who's trying to escape the hellholes they live in, and we're going to treat them all as potential combatants because we don't know which ones of them are combatants. All of that makes it a very thorny issue. I think the president and the Democrats they are caught up in this whole concept of the wall, pro and con, for the same reason. Because the president, it's not just about border security. The wall is an avatar. The wall is a picture of an idea. It means something. And it means that I, President Trump, am going to keep this country safe. And I am going to protect not only your physical persons, but your jobs by building this kind of structure. The Democrats, on the other hand, who may pay lip service to, wanting to have proper immigration laws, wanting to have proper border security, they can't have the wall because it is an avatar that says to some of their supporters, we don't like brown people. And that is this is not really what it's meant to be, but this is how they say it. So Nancy Pelosi could probably get away with saying, President Trump, I'm going to give you, we'll allocate $5 billion for border security, just don't build a wall. And her supporters would say, okay, yeah, well, we're generally in favor of safe borders, and that's okay. But the wall is a cultural icon that says to a group of people, we want you on the other side of that. And that's what causes problems for the Democrats.
Yes, because because people like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer need as many illegal immigrants in the country as possible, because there are some jobs that Americans just won't do, and one of them is voting for Democrats in large numbers. So these people have to be imported. Steve, that brings up an interesting kind of a half measure. First of all, one of the modern lessons we can learn is in terms of security and whether walls actually work or not. We're constantly told they won't work and there's just no way for it to work and so on. But when Israel decided to build a wall between themselves and the Palestinians, they basically saw the terror attacks go to zero.
Yeah.
And I mean pretty much to zero. So it works, no question it works. And as Scott said, Steve, a lot of Americans can't stand the idea of a wall because it makes it look like a prison. But my understanding about a prison is a prison wall is designed to keep people from getting out. A fence or a wall around your property is designed to keep people from getting in. I see a big difference there. But as a
we're not building
halfway
the Berlin
measure,
Wall.
that's right. So as a halfway measure, and let's say that that Nancy Pelosi agrees to $2 billion, $5 billion, whatever. Yes, you can have your secure border, Mr. President, until we get power back again. But until then, yes, here's a few $1 billion, so long as you don't build the wall. If Donald Trump, as commander-in-chief, were to order patrols using either Predator drones, higher altitude drones, Apache helicopters, our night vision, our thermal sensors, all the rest of it, we could, as a military operation, stop illegal immigration into this country. I think we could do that fairly effectively. I'm not talking about shooting on the people when they come out of the tunnels or stuff. I'm simply saying if we really wanted to, we could identify and stop every single one of them. There's no question we have the technology to do that. Do you think that's something that President Trump should be thinking about as a commander-in-chief?
Yeah, there are really two cases here. There's the moral case and the practical case, and I think the moral case is really clear cut. And I'm going to have to go into some detail on this. I think the moral case on national security is so clear cut. We live in an age of terrorism and the resurgence of infectious disease. And as much as I love immigration, and I'm a huge pro-legal immigration guy, I got to ask that you check your hat and coat at the door. It's not very much to ask, but we've got to know who is coming in and what are you carrying. Is it C4? Is it Ebola? There are things we don't want you bringing into this country, and those are just two of them, because we can't afford it in this day and age. And an open border kind of made sense 100 years ago. We had a lot more room in this country, and there were a lot fewer people south of the border. There were like 4 million people in Mexico, and some of them across the border seasonally to work and go back home. What we have lost in this population explosion, and we're getting a little bit away from national defense here, but I think this point needs to be said. We've reached a point of immigration, whether it's legal or illegal, where numbers can and have come across our borders. And I don't care about color, but I do care deeply about the culture, this unique American culture. We can assimilate anybody, but we can only assimilate so many at a time. And what happens is when people come here from wherever it is in great enough numbers, they tend to stick with their own people instead of assimilating. And we saw this happen in California, where in less than a generation, the number of immigrants coming into California permanently altered that state's culture to the point where it was a part of the Republicans' wall. When you were calculating the Electoral College, the first thing you did was color California for the Republican. And that changed hardcore. It went hard GOP in 1988 to hard Democrat in 1992. There was a tipping point there. And again, this has nothing to do with skin color. It has everything to do with culture. And we can only assimilate so many at any given time. So it makes sense to have some kind of controls on the border. But this brings us to the practical case, Bill, and this is where I've got a real issue. And I haven't made up my mind on this. I'm going to have to do some more thinking on it. But you're always taking a risk when you try and take the military, whose job is to kill people and break things, and use it for what is essentially a civilian police activity.
Fully understand that, yes.
And wow, if that doesn't give a person pause, That idea of using your military for a civilian police force purpose, you got to pause on that. You got to think long and hard on that. And I haven't had the chance to do that, so I don't know which side I'm going to fall on that. But I do know that I'm going to take this moment to pause and really think about it and turn it back over to you.
Well, if it turned out that the U.S. military were policing American cities with night vision goggles, I think there would be no question among any one of us that this is absolutely inappropriate, but we're not talking about that.
No.
We're talking about foreign nationals entering the country illegally in large numbers. And personally, as for me, I think the disease argument, the crime argument are irrelevant. I think if you base yourself on that, what you're basically saying is we're trying to filter out criminals and terrorists when that's not the problem. The number of people coming over the border illegally is the problem, and the problem is that, as you pointed out, we can assimilate just about anybody.
Oh, hell
but
yeah.
This is probably the first serious wave of immigrants in this country that really don't desire to be assimilated. They're not coming here to become Americans and learn English and pledge allegiance to the flag. They're not coming here for that. It's clear. And if this is not an invasion, if you were to count the number of people coming over the border on any given night in the United States, put all those people on a spot that was 100 yards wide, looked like battalion after battalion every single evening. I'm not happy that the situation has gotten to this point. But one of the things, I'm not happy at all about it. But if you can't have a border, you have to have a wall. And since the progressives have made sure that we couldn't have a border, we're now in a situation where there is essentially, and this is the point, I think, there is no deterrence to trying to sneak into the United States of America at nighttime. There is nothing to deter you from doing this. Not only does that make all of the legal immigrants look like chumps and suckers, because all they had to do was just, instead of trying to spend 7 years and $8,000 coming to America, just go to Mexico, walk on in, just like everybody else, which is an important ethical point. But it comes to a question of what is a country, what is worth defending, what is the actual definition of a people in terms of their nationality. And to me, I completely agree with that analysis in The Revenge of Geography, that it is the number one national security issue for the United States, the border with Mexico. So a wall is not necessary, but if you don't get a wall, what is necessary is an aggressive use of patrols to essentially make this not worth the candle. We have not seen what would happen in this situation, but I suspect that if you were to employ the military for a year, let's say, and catch essentially every single one of the people coming over the border, and cheerfully and in a civilized fashion with medical care and a great deal of humanity, simply return them back to the country from which they came, or the country from which they came to us from, put them back over the border. You can point out, here's an entry point for legal citizens. If you want to come in here, we're more than welcome to have you. Here's how you go about those processes. We'll put a big poster or a little leaflet in everybody's hand when we send it back on the correct way to legally enter the United States. I suspect if you did that for a year, you wouldn't need that kind of presence after the year, because the equation would change. There would now be a realization that you cannot simply walk into this person's backyard. So when it's all about terrorists and diseases, that's like saying, I don't want lepers in my house at night without my invitation. I don't want lepers just coming into my house at night and sitting on my couch without my permission. But the point of the fact is, I don't want anybody coming into my house at night without my permission. And I am sleeping, and it could even be the Swedish bikini team. And I don't want people coming into my house at night without knowing who they are first.
They're so creepy.
Yeah, so there you go. Once again, we find ourselves in a situation where we now have to weigh two alternatives, one of which is morally dubious, and the other is just plain suicidal. And this is the world that you live in when you're a conservative. You realize that the world does not consist of good choices and bad choices. That would be easy. There are only bad choices and worse choices. And this is where we find ourselves, thanks to both parties of a political class that have let this problem go on and on and on and on and on and on and on for way too long. That'll do it for this edition of Right Angle, brought to you by the paying members at BillWhittle.com. Love to hear what you have to say about it in the comments, and we certainly love to have you be a producer member, citizen producer. If you want to keep these messages coming, you can go to BillWhittle.com and just become a member there, and we'd love to have you. Until next week, I'm Bill Whittle for Steve Green and Scott Ott. Thanks for joining us on Right Angle.